Hello everyone and welcome to the tiebreaks of the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin. In this video we'll have a look at the tiebreak between Dominguez and Wesley So, who tied for first place in Pool D to determine the opponent of Levan Aronian in the semifinals. Now the first game ended in a draw, not too exciting in a Queen's Gambit accepted, but let's see what Lanier was going to do with white pieces. So Lanier started the game off with the move 1e4 and Wesley responded with e5. And Lanier brought out his favorite opening, the Italian game. Now Wesley played knight f6, and here he's inviting Lanier to go into the FIDE liver attack with knight g5. But at the top level, the FIDE liver is quite forcing. The players generally know what they're doing, so Lanier went for a bit more of a slower approach with the move d3, defending the pawn on e4. Wesley brought out his bishop to c5, Lanier castled, Wesley castled, and Lanier played the move h3. Now h3 always stops the knight from coming to g4, and also potentially the bishop coming to g4 as well. So Wesley played the move d6, c3, and a5, gaining some space on the queen side and making sure that his bishop can always drop back, rook e1 by Lanier, and bishop e6 by Wesley. Now here white can trade on e6, but black gets control over the d5 and f5 squares. And besides, now he also gets to open f-file for his rook. So Lanier didn't quite fancy that. He played the move bishop e5, keeping pieces on the board. And Wesley played bishop a7, dropping the bishop back. And actually the players already had this in the group stage. So Lanier played knight b2, knight e7 by Wesley, d4, and knight g6. All pretty standard. This knight on g6 can sometimes hop to f4. Lanier played bishop a4, and like, you might be wondering, like, okay, what is the point behind bishop a4, right? Like, what does this move even do? But there's a lot of subtleties in positions like these. The bishop very often wants to come back to the c2 square to defend the pawn on e4 and have more control in the center. So Wesley played knight h5, knight f1, and knight h4. And after knight g3, he played c6, just taking slowly but surely more control over the center. And after bishop c2, he played the move queen d7. With this move, he's making his intentions very, very clear. Let's say Lanier plays a move like bishop e3, all of a sudden he's going to go boom, bishop takes h3. And if you recapture, you're going to get checkmated over here. So you don't want to allow that. So instead of all that, Lanier played knight f5, blocking the sacrifice on f5. And Wesley was still playing quite quickly here. He played f6, strengthening the center. But after Lanier's next move, bishop e3, which looked very logical, here he was sent into the think tank. As I was doing commentary with my co-host Marie Emilianova, we thought that the best move here for Wesley should be the move d5 to create a lot of tension in the center and to undermine his pawn on e4, which is defending the knight on f5. White probably has to trade on e5, but after we recapture, the position should probably be balanced. But instead of all that, Wesley played king h8, which just seemed a bit too slow. And here Lanier found a very strong move. He just captured on e5. Now things are not easy for Wesley. Let's say he trades on e3, white's going to recapture, thanks vintage for the 5 gifted, and the knight is under attack, so you don't want to do that. Now if you take with the d pawn, the endgames are always going to be quite tough, because white trades the queens, then goes rook 81, and the pressure on the bishop is not easy to deal with. So Wesley took with the f pawn, and he opens up his rook at the same time. Now Lanier played knight g5, a nasty move, putting pressure on the bishop on e6, and also in some cases he wants to go for g3 because his pawn on h3 is defended. So Wesley played d5 because his pawn was under attack. Now Lanier traded on e6, traded on a7, quite an unpleasant move because you have to recapture with the rook, and the rook on a7 is always quite misplaced, and Lanier followed up with queen to g4. Alright, so now the position is very tricky. g3 is always a threat because you hit the knight, and where's the knight gonna go? All of the squares of the knight are covered. So Wesley played queen f6. I guess he just wanted to make sure that he always has this square for his knight. But Lanier played rook 81. And the difficult thing for Wesley is now that, let's say he makes a move like rook a8, white can always go g3. And if you move the knight back, white's gonna trade on d5, and all of a sudden white takes a pawn, and black's just completely busted. So Wesley played h5, pushing the queen back. So now g3 is more difficult to get into the position because you hang this pawn over here. But notice that this pawn on h5 really weakens the black king over here. This pawn is also hanging. So Wesley played queen to g5, and Lanier played queen to g3. Now you can't really trade the queens because white's going to take with the pawn, your knight's under attack. And if you move back, white's going to take here and then take on d5. And black's practically lost here. You're down a pawn and everything is loose. So Wesley kept the queens on the board with queen to f6, but now Lanier played king to h2. A very useful move, because if you now go queen f3 and g3, the pawn on h3 is always protected by the king. So Wesley played rook a8, trying to bring the rook back into the game. Queen f3, now g3 once again is a major threat. And what are you going to do about it? So Wesley played knight h4. They traded, and now you cannot play g3 because you hang this pawn on h3. So that was Wesley's point. But now Lanier takes the pawn on d5, and Wesley's in trouble. If you recapture with the pawn, white's just going to take the pawn on d5 with the rook, and you're completely busted. I mean, this pawn on h5 is always hanging. Everything in the black position is collapsing. So Wesley took on g2, trying to spice up the game, but this does not quite work. But the position is tricky. If you take the knight with the queen, black's going to take with the rook, and you're going to lose your queen. So black's simply going to win the game. But Lanier found a very strong response. He played queen to d3, and all of a sudden he's threatening checkmate on the h7 square. And how are you going to stop that? Wesley played the move e4, but Lanier just took it. And now he's also hitting the queen. So here the only move for Wesley to stay in the game would have been knight f4. Right, he has to save this knight, and things are not that easy for Lanier. If you take this knight, which looks great for white, right, because you take the knight, you threaten checkmate, but black is going to take with a check. With a check, Jesus. Holy smokes, what was that? Queen takes f4 check. And the game is very, very complicated. So knight f4 would have been the only move to stay in the game. White probably is still better after queen e3, but it remains very, very complicated. But Wesley took on f2, probably hoping for something like rook e2 by Lanier, which looks great for white. Because you hit the queen, you threaten checkmate, but all of a sudden white has that... Black has the amazing knight e1 check. And if you take with the rook. And everything works out for black. If you move the king back, we're going to take the queen. The rook is protected. And white is simply losing too much material here. But Lanier just played the calm and collected king to h1, getting out of this discovery, and there's simply nothing you can do with black. White is threatening rook e2, hitting your queen and threatening checkmate. And once again, what are you going to do? Let's say you go g6, we just go rook e2, the queen is under attack. If the queen moves anywhere, like let's say here, you just take the knight and the position is just completely lost. You're down a piece and it's white who is attacking. This king on h1 is completely safe. So Wesley, instead of all that, played knight h4. He's threatening checkmate, but Lanier just took the knight. He's still threatening checkmate on h7. Wesley played g6 to block this attack, but now Lanier just played rook takes h5, checking the king. And Wesley is just getting checkmated on the next move. If you take the rook, there's queen h7 checkmate, and if you go king to g7, then there's queen takes g6 checkmate. So Wesley resigned, which means that Lanier moves on to the semifinal against Levon Aronian. Huge win for him, and sadly for Wesley, that means his chances of making it to the candidates are practically over. I mean, he will have to win the next Grand Prix, but that might even not. I cannot talk anymore. That might not even be enough. So very, very tough loss for Wesley. Huge win for Lanier, who moves on to the semifinals against Levon Aronian. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.